watch the Bears yesterday?
It
was the worst.
It didn't look good. They didn't play well. Just from the start, it was.
If they don't fire that coach, I usually don't do you should fire the coach. It was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen.
I mean, the quarterback's good. There's no two sense of.
Yeah.
I mean, he's smart. He's aware. I mean, how many times did that poor guy have to run out of the pocket and then run right, throw right, which is incredibly hard to do if you're right-handed. Salvage stuff out of nowhere, but not a lot of originality coming out of any of it. So it
was awful.
They got dominated.
Pretty hard to watch.
Yeah, and I honestly thought with that fluke the week before they were going to come back really hard. They were going to put a lot of points up in the first.
At least be close
in the first quarter because they talked about. I think they've only scored 7 points the entire year in the first quarter. And you went through the first exchange of downs. It's like nothing's changed. This is not going to work really well.
It's one of those all of the stats they're saying during the game is how could you possibly be employing this guy? Yeah. Where it's just they never score early. And it's and whenever they win, it's against the worst teams ever. Right. And it's what do we do? What do we do? And it's the quarterback looks like he's on fire all the time.
Before the game went off, the line was pretty much close to a push. I think it was 1.5 points or something like that.
Yeah, and the Bears might have even been favored at some point.
They were at the start.
Which they have a good defense. Yeah. Even the Hail Mary last week aside.
Yeah.
Good defense, good enough offense players, but can't put it together.
Couldn't put it together.
Too bad. Anyways, let's see what's going on.
What can we put together? Because we got an action-packed week coming up.
2 days away from the election, less than 2 days, I guess, away from the election results. An interesting move last night across the board, Pete. It seems like you have the election markets getting very close to 50-50, and you have U.S. dollar giving up a ton of ground in pretty much every single pair. I'm going to start off by focusing on the North American pairs here, just because you can see this move from last night, Pete, continuation throughout the early part of Asia, a little bit of bounce in U.S. dollar, and right now pretty much trading at those lows after a huge rally to
Friday was a really post-unemployment and everything. They put a bid back into the dollar in everything. Euro, Canada, up near its highs. Aussie got sold really hard. Even yen, Swiss got crushed. And they took a big fair, the election prediction markets, whatever you look at, came back from the 37, or was it 37.63
it got
to
up
almost
50
at one point. But it's ebbing back and forth. But, you look at it and it's interesting because there's a two-way back and forth. It's an interesting market. It'll be interesting to see for these exchanges, what are they going to offer? I mean, this can't be we make money once every 4 years. So it'll be interesting to see what they end up kind of catching everybody with moving forward. But a lot of I think we're seeing a little bit of risk being taken off the table. We saw a little bit of correction on the extremes and that market coming back in. Is it an accurate predictor? I don't know. It's moved back and forth and it swings on every poll. I think the takeaway is the election is going to be closer than most people think, and we'll see. But things like peso definitely gave back some ground after clearing pretty clearly, clearing above the old highs, above 20 pesos to the dollar. Then we're still above 20 pesos to the dollar, but gave back a fair chunk of the move we saw on Friday and last week. So a little bit of that risk coming off the table, which will be interesting to see if that plays through the rest of today and tomorrow. We saw bonds trade higher overnight, interest rates trade a little bit lower, but this has been an interesting move.
Well, yeah, it's definitely interesting that these markets going into the actual election seem to be very highly correlated one way or the other, which is U.S. dollar positively correlated with Trump's odds of winning and U.S. dollar negatively correlated with Harris's. That being said, we have no clue what's going to happen if one person or the other is elected on Tuesday, which is kind of wild to me because a couple of things. One, the correlation seems very, very strong because if there's anything that you and I saw yesterday going into the forex and futures open, it was all of the items around, oh, this is actually closer to a 50-50 race than these predictive markets that, I mean, you saw ones last week that were 58% Trump or 60 bid on Trump in some cases, getting as high as 65 cents in that range, which is pretty high going into the election,
going into a pick'em event basis, the polling.
And so now we get to Sunday, and before everything opens up, like I say, the only stuff that I really saw, and it was because I don't really actually read any news, but my girlfriend's like, oh, did you see that, like, now it's close to 50-50 in terms of those markets, not only the polling, but those markets now are close to 50-50. And so then you see on the open, U.S. dollar gets slammed. Here's a dollar versus peso, dollar versus Canada. To your point, Pete, I mean, name a major pair. U.S. dollar got slammed. You see a huge rally in euro, and euro's actually continuing here now through 109.
Yeah, it's holding on. Take a look at Swiss, too. Swiss is really having, Swiss is, and it's interesting. I think there's an interesting play here in Swiss, too. Proportionally, probably one of the chunkiest moves we've seen in dollar Swiss in terms of sell. Now, Swiss wears that kind of dual skin, a little bit of flight to quality, safe haven, always. But it also has kind of, with the dollar strength, really, I mean, they put a lot into this Friday into the close.
Yeah.
But this is now, it's interesting. You look at this, we're through all the clutter from the last couple of days to the downside. And if you think about it, okay, so whatever the election outcome, if it's uncertain or it really is close, things like Swiss and yen may outperform some of the other currencies.
In terms of volatility.
Yeah. So they're going to you're starting to see what's going to become a little bit more elastic. And it's things like Swiss, things like yen will. There's three ways you can go into this. And actually, Tom wrote a cherry bomb on this over the weekend, which was spot on. You can kind of button down the hatches and tighten up everything you've got on, make it smaller. You can widen out a little bit on your areas where you're positioning and looking for opportunities, or you can kind of go a little bit more aggressive and take some directional assumptions depending on who you think's going to win. And the one takeaway from that, though, is even if I handed you, here's the winner, but you can't manage your position for 24 hours. I wouldn't want that. Well, because that doesn't, I think for us, we've seen a little bit of this edge, and we were wondering how hard are they going to push this dollar into the election? Well, they've taken a little bit out of it today. I would imagine they might take a little bit more out. We'll see what happens the rest of the day as we progress towards and into Tuesday. But there's going to be some interesting back and forth.
Well, and I guess that's my point, is the correlation seems super strong, I guess, one way or the other, like I say, going into this election, which is kind of surprising to me. The almost binary of, like, Trump is up, and so U.S. dollar is up, 50 pips or whatever, pretty much across the board. Trump is down today, and the U.S. dollar is down. And is it exactly one for one? No, but the correlation's obviously there the last couple of weeks. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, the last handful of elections, I can't remember going back to the Obama presidency, an election that was one-sided going into it and then was one-sided throughout.
Right.
We've gone back and forth to, one side winning, the other side winning, and then maybe back again every single election. I mean, you remember the last one, when Biden was elected, it was he was favored going into it, and then the night of, Trump ends up being favored for a heavy portion of that night. And then Biden ends up winning. Huge. And then, of course, obviously, the Clinton-Trump before that, no one thought that Trump was going to win. And then you saw so much back and forth, and then Trump wins. And so it's interesting for a multitude of reasons. One being that these election markets, as well as these forex markets, seem to be very mean reverting going into this event. But also after the fact, I couldn't agree with you more, that I have no confidence in what the correlation is going to be Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Because look at this, Pete. I mean, you have to take into account the context here that if Trump wins, and you might say, oh, okay, I'm going to buy as much as I possibly can. dollar is at multi-year highs against the peso, against the Canadian dollar, multi-month highs against almost every major European currency. I mean, you have to keep in mind this context here, because you might have, if we get a Trump presidency, you might have a U.S. dollar rally to 20.25, 2050 here against peso, and then give back ground to wherever.
Right.
Really anything on the table going into this election, which I think is the most interesting, because the way that you and I tend to play stuff like this, and of course, everybody's got their own strategy, the way that they want to do things, is to be relatively, and maybe we do this the last couple of minutes here, is get your take as we head into really the 24 hours of the election starting tonight. I would tend to be relatively light and just look for big moves one way or the other. I mean, because you've seen the same thing in cryptocurrencies or any asset class, which is huge moves in the one candidate's direction, and now then back to 50-50. And I think whatever president we get, there's going to be a lot of noise.
That's exactly right. I think you're spot on. And that noise, that back and forth of running one way, then running the other, depending on the results, we'll see that a couple of times, probably Tuesday. It'll be interesting to see if we actually have an outcome Tuesday night or not. I don't think we will. Some people feel very strongly, it's going to be very clear.
Okay.
I think we're going to have some back and forth. So I would be mindful. I agree with you. Trying to get ahead of this. Remember, and then Thursday we've got Fed rates, we've got BOE rates, we've got Canadian unemployment. I think getting past this and getting some certainty will be the best thing we can have to actually see where markets settle out then and get there. You get through that. I just treat this as a binary event with like long tail. So I'm looking for opportunities of back and forth when stuff goes too far in one direction or another. And I'm mindful that I'm going to set my scalping ranges a little bit wider than usual. And I'm not going to say, well, this isn't right. They should be doing this.
Yeah.
I'm going to accept the tape action and kind of define the levels where I'm going to take my profits or take my losses and look to re-engage. Don't get married to stuff. The randomness and the thinness we could see across every single product class. Remember, when Trump won the first time, equities went limit down and ended up opening higher on the day. And that's a 7% move. So are we going to see 7% in FX? I don't think so, but be mindful that, especially the constrained scalping ranges we've seen lately, we're going to give ourselves a little bit more rope to trade them. But be mindful that you want to be able to set expectations both in terms of management for good and for the losers, so you can come back and be engaged.
Yeah.
So don't get married to one side or the other is, I guess, my takeaway. So I set this up as any binary event. I'm going to look at some products I want to trade. I'm going to set the ranges I'm interested in and also the mechanics around that. And if they get to those levels, great. If not, I move on. I'm not going to force something out of nothing. So I think the market's going to give you opportunities. You're going to see elastic two-sided action. And that's all we want as traders.
Yeah. And just as a last note, one of the best things you can do in a scenario like this, if you are inclined to trade it, is try to diversify as much as possible across different products within an asset class and also outside of asset. Because another bad thing that you could do is, I have a hunch on how this is going to go if this person starts to lead or if this person starts to lead, and be like, okay, now I'm only in this dollar peso market.
Right.
One of the best things that can happen is if you have, some long dollar exposure in these 2 or 3 markets and some short dollar exposure in this market, and you've got multiple things going on, as opposed to like, nope, I'm short gold because Kamala is winning and I'm just going to, be short gold for, and it's like, that's going to be a tough night.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get a lot of sleep or diversification, risk management, any of those things.
And that's the other thing too. Chances are you're going to, and we've all, in my 42 years, I've tried to stay up all night trading, and it's usually not for good reasons. It's usually trying to defensively get myself. It doesn't end well. You're going to have to, again, have on the right size that you can weather the variables here. But I think you make a great point within the FX space. Not leaning all one way with your trading is probably a good strategy here. You know what? In that situation, you may be wrong or right on a group, but you've got something playing a little bit of defense.
Because you might also see some moves where it's like Aussie Canada. That's a cross that I tends to be, they're highly correlated. They're commodity currencies. They tend to trade in this range. And you might see so-and-so is leading and they're annihilating CAD and Aussie isn't getting hit. And so you might say, oh man, maybe there's something for me to do in this Canada just because this is one of those scenarios.
And that becomes more mean reverting and you're disconnected from the U.S. outcome.
Well, and this is one of those things, Pete, where you actually do see, not necessarily arbitrage, nothing is riskless, but you do tend to see like, man, this wouldn't happen in a normal day. But yeah, we have
to jump out of here. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great day.